The Spinoff Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code Spotify. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code Spotify.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi o te wā o Waitangi. Kia ora everybody, this is Te Aihe Butler, producer for Gone by Lunchtime. As part of our Waitangi 2025 coverage, the Spinoff has sent a small team consisting of myself and my colleagues, Ātea editor Liam Ratana and political reporter Lyric Waiwiri-Smith, up to Waitangi to report on events from the treaty grounds. We went down to the waterfront to record a special bonus edition of Gone by Lunchtime. Aroha mai, no Ben, Toby or Annabelle this time, but rest assured they will be back next week. Ngā mihi, and we hope you enjoy.
Kia ora. This is Lyric Waiwiri-Smith. I am the Spinoff's political reporter, here with Liam Ratana.
Kia ora Lyric. Here we are, beautiful Waitangi.
Yeah, can you hear the rolling waves?
The envy of Toby Manhire, Ben Thomas and, Annabelle's here, but they don't record on the beach for every podcast, so it's quite a privilege to...
Yeah, Toby's stuck with Point Chev Beach, which is real stink.
It's not a bad beach, but...
Not the best beach.
It's not this.
Nah.
It's not this.
We did run into Annabelle on the Waitangi Treaty Grounds, and there is an effort going to convince Toby and Ben to come up next year. So
there we go. This might be the podcast that brings him here.
That's what we need at Waitangi, is like more white guys.
100%.
That's what I reckon. So speaking of, shall we just wrap every political thing that we saw happen at Waitangi?
Yeah, I think we'd need a good 2-hour podcast to wrap every political thing. But
we'll do a speed run.
We'll try to touch on the main ones.
Right. So myself, Aihe and Liam got there on Tuesday morning. And I think at that point only the Greens were hanging about. I feel like pretty much all of them apart from Celia and Fran, they were on holiday too.
The other thing that had been happening too is the Iwi Chairs Forum had been taking place for the couple of days before we arrived. So that is sort of the coming together of all the heads of the iwi before the politicians and all the government officials start arriving. So apparently they had a really good feed, a nice gala dinner full of crayfish and paua and all the stuff that we would have loved to have eaten on this trip. And then, we got here and pretty much straight into it, eh?
It literally just happened to us and I can't even remember what we did.
Yeah, we've been up since 3:30, more like 3:45 for me this morning. So, yeah, it's been a hectic week in general. What's been a standout memory for you, Lyric, so far politically?
I guess it would have to be the Seymour standoff yesterday during the pōwhiri for the parliamentarians. It was just pure theatre, eh? Watching...
Specifically, you're talking about when his mic was snatched away from him and the demonstration?
Yeah, the 2 times that his mic was taken and then returned. It was switched off at first, and then he ended with a very chummy, to kind of paraphrase here, we're going to have to work together at some point. You know you want to.
To you, ngā mihi, and I look forward to working with you. You know you want to, and you know that ultimately we all have to.
That went down terribly, but he seemed quite chuffed with himself. He had a impromptu media stand-up after that.
Well, I wanted to ask Lyric, do you think that he really got what he came for in terms of, I guess if you were to analyse why David Seymour came to Waitangi after his own hapu even asked him to not come to Waitangi?
I mean, I think he'll be the speech that was remembered the most, and I think he'll be the man that was remembered the most, and it seemed like he was the most talked about, most followed around, but also the most controversial person at Waitangi, and I think he's very welcome as a New Zealander, you know, as tangata whenua. He does have a right to be there.
That's a hot take.
Yeah, but he knows the consequences of, well, I guess the challenge of turning up to a place like that when he knows that the relations between himself and iwi have been really stretched thin. And his rhetoric hasn't really helped.
So we just have to pause because there's a dolphin jumping out of the water right in front of where we're recording our podcast.
Oh my gosh.
At Toby Manhire. When's the last time you saw that, Toby, when you were recording the podcast?
So you reckon, though, that he shouldn't have shown up at all? It's a hot take that he has a right to be there.
I don't want to form an opinion on whether or not he should have been here. I mean, politically, I guess it makes a lot of sense because he gets so much airtime. Like, what we're doing right now is basically talking about him, which is exactly what he wanted to achieve, is people talking about him, and either which way you view it, we're giving him press, we're giving him coverage, and I feel like perhaps the mana whenua and the people who asked him not to come, and even Apirama Edwards, who took away his microphone, was trying to not give him airtime. I was down at the lower forum tents and there was a kuia there, Mariana Pittman was her name. She was speaking about how she wouldn't even say his name to begin with anyway. She was really about sort of, starving the fire of the oxygen, so to speak. So I think I wanted to touch on something else you mentioned there, the speech that will be remembered the most being David Seymour's. I think a hot second then would be Tama Potaka and him calling himself a kūpapa. It's pretty interesting. I missed it. Obviously, I was down at the lower tent, but you were there. What was the reaction like from the crowd? You guys were there and you saw it.
That comment got a few laughs.
Yeah, I think his specific verb was e kūpapa ana au, and then he went on to justify that, which is basically saying he was acknowledging that he was behaving in the way of a kūpapa, and then was trying to talk about some nuance in the original translation of kūpapa. Just cutting in to say that the term kūpapa here is taken to mean traitor or turncoat, similar to the American term Uncle Tom. In this instance, a Māori who has sided with the Pākehā. It was lost on me.
It didn't really work, to be honest.
Nah. It was interesting to see him there in the absence of his party leader and Prime Minister.
Pretty shit gig after everything that's happened with the coalition government. I mean, Luxon himself has said that he thinks that Māori Crown relationships are, quote-unquote, probably worse than when the coalition government first came into power. So it is pretty tough while, Luxon's probably enjoying oysters. But hey, someone has to front up. Someone has to speak to, the government side. And Potaka's tactic to, play on kūpapa-kaupapa, I guess it was clever in his own way, but I'm not sure it really worked.
I can just see his press sec in the background probably like face palming himself when Tama Potaka did that, going, oh, how am I going to spin this one? I think it was probably his only slip up from what I saw, the little that I did see of Tama Potaka's stand-ups and things. Otherwise, he had his lines down before he came. He knew the questions that were going to get asked for the most part, I think. And him saying that it's an honour and it's a privilege and I'm just happy to be here, and that sort of vibe was his way of deflecting the questions about the Prime Minister not being here at Waitangi, especially like you said, when it's such a, what felt like such an important Waitangi given the circumstances. You wrote an article about the Prime Minister not being here, which has obviously been the elephant in the room or not in the room. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and sort of your take on Christopher Luxon not being here? I know he wrote an opinion piece in the Herald today, which was like his speech, I think, was like kind of something he's used.
I found that there was definitely a lot of hurt, perhaps at the beginning when he, confirmed that he wouldn't be on the treaty grounds for Waitangi Day. But it's sort of what I found kind of had turned into indifference. In my mind, politics is a blip in the Waitangi calendar that manages to take up most of the headlines. So I suppose, I don't know if this is a hot take as well, but the Prime Minister has a duty to, celebrate Waitangi, and I think it's fair that you'd want to celebrate that with iwi across the motu, but
this is the birthplace of the document. So I guess that's why the locals here, the likes of Peter Tipini and Others feel like, I guess, I want to say the most honourable way to honour Waitangi is to come here and be celebrating or acknowledging that moment in time with the people who were original signatories to it and helped draft the agreement. So, well, in a way, So,
and a Prime Minister's absence usually if we look at recent history, it usually follows some sort of falling out with Māori, whether it was, John Key's TPP deal or Helen Clark crying on the marae.
Bill English just trying to avoid Waitangi for no particular reason. So in his place, we had come in on the 5th for National. We had 4 ministers in total, was it? We had Shane Tiriti.
Shane was there. Paul Goldsmith was there.
Mark Mitchell. Andrew Bailey was there also.
Right. Tama.
Erica Stanford was around, was she?
Oh, yeah. No, she was. She was.
There you go. So a handful of ministers to take, and pretty senior ministers at that, to take the place of the Prime Minister. So it's not like they weren't well represented, but not having the man in the top job, I guess, felt like a bit of a
snub.
Yeah.
They did have Speaker of the House, Jerry Brownlee, leading the advance during the pōwhiri and accepting the wero. And even though he's Mr. Speaker now, still has strong national energy.
Man, I really miss when Labour used to do the barbecue, because when Trevor Mallard gave you your serviettes, you could just say, "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," and he'd give you the weakest laugh because he'd already heard it 100 times that morning. Bring it back, just so we can do that.
One other person who had kōrero specifically to do with the Prime Minister's absence and Tama Potaka referring to himself as a kūpapa was rejuvenated Marama Davidson.
That buzz cut was bomb.
She's looking very healthy.
Yeah, she was guns blazing. The Greens held a few stand-ups to sort of, I guess, cement the fact that they are, pro-toitu tiriti.
This place definitely feels like somewhere where Te Pāti Māori, naturally, and the Green Party are quite comfortable to sort of just be amongst the people roaming around, whereas the likes of Paul Goldsmith and Tama Potaka are probably having lots of backroom conversations at the Copthorne Hotel and other little secret offshoots around the place, which, from what I gather, are where a lot of big deals get done. And I guess beyond the political forums and pōwhiri that take place here, that's probably the most important political arena, are those little backroom meetings happening between the likes of iwi leaders and iwi execs and the ministers that are here in attendance. So it's quite an interesting thing as media to be here covering that. But I wanted to bring up Te Pāti Māori and their policy announcement on yesterday. They announced that they would like to establish a Tiriti Commission. What do you make of it, Lyric?
The funniest thing was Tama Potaka saying, "It's a very interesting idea," multiple times.
Well, it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea. Well, it's an interesting idea. And I'll describe it again. We think it's an interesting idea.
And it's a very interesting idea. I mean...
Yeah, Goldsmith got asked and I think the question that was put to him was, would you support a commission that could overrule the government, which I don't think any government minister would agree to on the spot at a media stand-up at Waitangi, especially when you're a National Party minister.
Actually, I've got Paul Goldsmith's response to that right here, actually. Let's just hear what he had to say.
Yes, I'm not in favour of that at all.
Goldsmith has spoken. It will never happen.
There you go.
At least he doesn't mince his words.
Yeah, there you go. Well, when Te Pāti Māori announced it, they had sort of gathered media for a little stand-up that was supposed to coincide with the kingitanga. They announced it on Tuesday because that's when the kingitanga arrived. And we thought that was going to be all about their relationship with the kingitanga. And then when they dropped that announcement about a Tiriti Commissioner, kind of caught everyone off guard. And I think that the narrative that caught the attention of the political editors was that commissioner having the power to quote unquote veto any sort of parliamentary decision, which would not be ideal, but I guess it could also depend on who you elect as the commissioner. I mean, it wouldn't be ideal for Goldsmith, yeah.
It would be interesting to understand, and I think this is what Tama Potaka was alluding to, how exactly it would work. Obviously we already have commissioners out there like the Public Service Commission and the Human Rights Commission and others. Sorry, we're just stopping quickly because there's a bunch of horses with men in cowboy hats and beer bottles walking
Went
past.
up north.
We should podcast in the far north more often.
We literally just saw dolphins jumping out, and now we've got cowboys riding past with a feed of fish and chips on the beach.
What a time to be alive.
This is what you're missing out on, Christopher Luxon.
If there's anything that makes you lose your train of thought, that's probably up there.
Yeah, the Commissioner. I feel like the problem is that Te Pāti Māori didn't really seem to have an idea of how it would work. They described a Commissioner that would have teeth. Teeth was, the expression they used throughout. And it kind of seemed like the only idea they had for it. They talked about having a plan for the first 50 days, but there just weren't, the finer details ironed out. But, it's not unusual for parties to go around on Waitangi, during Waitangi week to drop some new announcements and see how they get picked up.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a Te Pāti Māori voter, I would probably be quite happy with the announcement. It sort of follows the line of the hikoi that they had last year calling, and they made a declaration calling for the establishment of a Māori parliament. Then we had the Toitu Te Tiriti hikoi, and we've had this whole discussion, obviously, especially here at Waitangi, around mana motuhake and self-sovereignty. And even some of the discourse from the ministers and the likes has been about decentralisation of power. They're not calling it partnership because that word seems to trigger people, but it has been around sort of empowering iwi, hapu, Māori in general to sort of decide their own future. That obviously looks like a bunch of money normally being given to people to do with it what they may, but especially in the form of treaty settlements. But what this commission, as I see it on the face value, it would sort of act like a treaty house almost, which is in line with what Te Pāti Māori was calling for at the hikoi. So it's quite an interesting concept, and obviously the devil's in the detail, but if I were a Te Pāti Māori voter, I would be taking some comfort in seeing that those aspirations are sort of getting married in with the actual mechanics, or they're figuring out the mechanics of the mechanisms and machinery of Parliament well enough to be able to actually bring those ideas to life and fruition. So I found that quite an interesting part of this pitch. Obviously they're not in government, and
Chris Hipkins has already said he wouldn't support it, so that would,
well, that shoots it down pretty quick then, Well, that was an enjoyable 5 minutes as a Te Pāti Māori voter. Now I'm done.
Well, to quote Tama Potaka,
it's an interesting idea.
But I suppose if your biggest worry is the Treaty Principles Bill and we've been told many, many times that it won't pass, but I suppose there's a lot of feelings around the damage it's done to the relationship between the Crown and Māori already. So if you're told that this Commissioner would have had the power to make sure that bill never got to its first reading, you'd be very tempted to vote for that party, wouldn't you?
Highly likely.
Kotahi mea anō, I did just want to get your guys' thoughts on Te Pāti Labour. We haven't really mentioned them much other than the odd reference to Chris Hipkins, who was vocal and I guess took his opportunities.
I saw Shannon Halbert, I saw Willow Jean Prime. I didn't speak to either of them. Penny Henare was obviously on the taumata and had quite a prominent voice here, as in uri of Ngāpuhi and of the far north. Te Taitokoro in general, he's quite a well-respected person. He's got some strong whakapapa, and his father and grandfather are quite well-respected people. But besides that, I can't say I saw anything too noticeable from Te Pāti Reipa this Waitangi Day.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. In the vein of what you're saying about Te Pāti Māori and Greens, being in the element here this year, I don't know, I feel like I'm living in an echo chamber maybe sometimes, but it kind of
Great
seems
column,
like...
by the way.
Shout out to Lyric Waiwiri-Smith's new column on the spinoff.co.nz Echo Chamber. Twice weekly from the Press Gallery?
Yeah, we cover parliamentary sessions and the Tuesday and Wednesday question time. But back to the pod. It just sort of seems like Labour really flew under the radar. And also, I'm not sure if you caught Chippy's speech yesterday, but I always think about that moment when he was like, we're not scared of Māori. And now whenever he opens his mouth, it kind of gives that. Like, these taringas aren't painted on. It's like, love the energy.
The taringa painted on, it was maybe the strongest image that he gave in his address during the pōwhiri, which is consistent with the general vibe. I'm just a podcast producer, but my vibe on it is that listening is not a strong, proactive way to claw back the reins of power for your struggling party.
Well,
it's a good start.
That's apparently what they did for a whole year, was listened. Potentially they're doing exactly what they should be, which is nothing, because if we look into the polls, Labour's been doing not much and their stock is rising without them really trying, and I think that's because of what the other side is doing, and they're sort of digging their own graves politically. Maybe not David Seymour per se, but National and Chris Luxon, if you read the polls, their popularity is decreasing. They've lost confidence of Aotearoa New Zealand. A majority of the country feels like we're not heading in the right direction, and so Chris Hipkins and Labour, if they're smart, and I think Toby's already said this on this podcast, is they will do nothing and stay quiet, and maybe they're exceeding at that and we're just overreading it.
Being in opposition is a pretty shit job, but it's made incredibly easy when those in government are arguably antagonising a significant portion of New Zealand. I know that Te Party Labour was supposed to be our last thing to talk about, but I'm quite curious, Liam, how you think the reception to New Zealand First and Shane Jones and Winston Peters might be changing. They're quite influential up here.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, they're both effectively kaumātua of the north, and Shane Jones especially, Uncle Shane, has got many ties to this area in particular and the nearby surrounds. So, and the people here, interesting to see that there was a group that I think stood up and turned their backs at during his kōrero at the pōwhiri, but I don't think he lets that get him down too much. I think he's a man who's obviously very well experienced and well aware that there are people who are fans of him and those that aren't, and I think he's got a thick enough skin to not let it get to him so much. So
it's just politicking.
And he's very good at it, I must say.
You guys are mates, eh? You guys are real good mates.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far.
Well, he didn't reply to your text.
No, I don't know where his great barbecue is happening tonight. Maybe he just lost my number and doesn't know who it is, but anyway.
Winston Peters' response to, the wahine turning their backs to him was, one day you're going to want to talk to us and we're going to turn our backs to you. I didn't think that was very helpful. How about you guys?
What I think about Winston is much of the same of what I think about Shane Jones, is that he's got a pretty thick skin. He's a very well-versed politician, obviously. The point is the people here at Waitangi aren't really his crowd. Those people turning their backs to him aren't really the people that will be likely to vote for Winston Peters in the future. So he probably knows that he's not losing any votes by saying what he said. And if anything, I would hypothesize that there is a group of people out there that would maybe hear that, and it may influence the way that they vote at next year's election. Yeah, that's my 5 cents. But what I did want to ask you, Lyric, is with the election happening next year, what are you expecting from Waitangi 2026, when the Spinoff will have even more comprehensive coverage?
And possibly a golf cart? For context, the golf carts are used by the most established media and the most prestigious kaumātua to get up and down the treaty grounds.
And we are both.
And we, sadly, were left out of the exclusive club.
In 2026, Waitangi Day, looking into my crystal ball, next year it'd be pretty cool to see the Prime Minister, wouldn't it? If he feels he owes the people here something, he'll show up.
If I was a betting man, I would say that he will be here next year, given that it's an election year.
But it's really interesting because, he's not here because he said that his intention has always been to spend Waitangi up and down the country with, different iwi. So it would be interesting to see if he does that again next year, just to hold him to his word and not feel as though he's skipped out on this year because of tensions.
Yeah, it will be interesting. I wonder if he'll get as far north as maybe Nelson or something next year then. You reckon? Kind of in the middle?
I don't know. That's pretty far north. Probably Dunedin, eh?
That's the other way, isn't it? Who end up on Stewart Island for like 2027?
It's still north of the bottom of the South Island.
If you've enjoyed this podcast literally straight from the shores of Waitangi itself, please make sure you check out the spinoff.co.nz/members. Become a member if you've enjoyed the Waitangi coverage. Also, just a reminder, we do have a live Gone by Lunchtime episode at Q Theatre in Auckland on April the 9th. Book your tickets before they sell out, because they will sell out.
Seagulls not included.
Thank you so much to Lyric and Liam for this bonus Gone by Lunchtime podcast.
Amen.
Thank you, Aihe.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.